Okay, this is Dwight Miller with Frances Supinger Crosson at her son and daughter-in-law's home in Exeter, California. It is November the 10th, 2022. And Fran has the distinction of being one of the only member of the class of 1939 at Exeter High School, still around. And so we want to talk to her about what it was like growing up in Exeter, California from 1921 on. So, Fran, let's start with where'd you guys live?
We lived on C Street in Exeter, North C Street.
North C, so the cross close to Palm, or?
It would be north of Main Street.
Were you very far from the tracks?
We were across the track. We were right across the tracks.
Okay.
Yes.
So North Sea.
At North Sea was, and then it dead ended at on the North Sea, ended into. At that time, it was a great vineyard.
Okay.
And then eventually it was, they changed and had a subdivision out in that area.
And that's the house you were in from the time you remember when you
Yes.
when you were born all the way through high school?
Yes.
You were a C Street kid.
Yeah, was a C Street kid. Walked to school, how many? Well, 3 or 4 blocks.
Down to Lincoln.
Down
Okay.
to South C Street was the end of where the school was, Lincoln School.
And they had the big auditorium there, and or not?
One big building. Yes, they have an auditorium. It was a U-shaped building, and they had the kindergarten through the 8th grade.
Okay.
An auditorium.
So that would have been in the late 20s when you started school there, kindergarten.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you remember it was Mr. Stadmiller, the principal?
Stadmiller was the principal.
Okay. The whole time.
The whole time that I was there. Yeah, he was there for many years.
And he was quite the music man, I understand.
He was a music man. Every graduation, he composed an operetta that we, at least on our year, we did. And, the singing and the acting, and that was our graduation program.
Really? And you had it right in the auditorium there?
Yes, right there in the auditorium. Yes.
Okay. Who were some other kids in your class that you kind of went all the way through with?
I went through school with Marion Sill, Pauline Olson, Maribel Harwell.
Were any of those kids in the C Street block with you?
Marion was at one time, before she moved on to C Street, just a few doors north of us. She came from out in the country.
Okay.
And they eventually moved into town.
Now, what did your father do for a living?
My father he was a foreman when he originally came from Virginia. He worked out on someone's ranch, and then he worked for Van Cleve Concrete for many years, and he eventually started a business of his own where he did concrete work.
Yeah, and that's what he was. So he was at Van Cleve's when you were pretty young.
Yes.
And then he started his own business later.
Yes.
So by the time you were in high school, he had his own business.
Yes.
Okay. And you were a Supinger.
I was a Supinger.
Did you have siblings?
I had 2 older brothers and a younger sister.
Okay. And they all went to Exeter High?
All went to Exeter High.
Okay. Were any of your brothers play football?
Yes, they both did.
Okay.
Both did. My oldest brother was killed in an accident when he was just 30s. And but my younger, or the next brother, he played a lot of football. He was
At Exeter High. And so those older brothers would have graduated in the mid-30s, like 35, 36.
my oldest brother graduated the year that I graduated from 8th grade. I mean, he graduated from high school.
Okay.
We were in, my other brother, we were in high school together.
Okay.
So.
All right. So you come into class, oh, you're one of so-and-so's little sister, right?
Yeah.
So I followed you everywhere. That's great. Well, so when you started high school in 1936, it's the middle of the Depression. What are your memories about starting high school in the Depression?
Well, I can tell you that it was certainly not like it is now. One thing, no one had a car in high school. By the time I was maybe a junior, maybe a couple of kids had cars, but not like everyone does now. I don't know. It was not easy, I suppose, for most people, but we never lacked in anything really. And as far as school, I think it was pretty basic. I don't know.
What was that big building like? Those big steps, the big arches inside.
The big building was, most of the classes were held in that big building. There was an upstairs, of course, where there was the library, and downstairs, of course, was the office. And I don't know if the history class and math class, English were downstairs, I think. The business class was upstairs, Spanish class. And then, of course, there was the music building, and it had the sewing room,
Right.
and the home economics classes.
In the old yearbooks, they called it the domestic arts.
Oh, okay.
So that was the domestic art building.
Yes, okay, that's about it.
Yeah. Well, did you have Mrs. Smith or Miss Partridge for any classes?
Smith and Mr. Smith and Miss Partridge, Miss Gillespie, Mr. Law was there.
He was the vice principal? Yeah.
Mr. Woods, I think he was the woodworking they had, and then they had an auto mechanics class. And I sort of think he taught both of those, as I remember.
Mr. Woods?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think of Mr. Smith?
He was nice. I mean, we didn't see much of him really. He was around, but there was no reason not to like him.
Right. Well, he'd been the principal for 20 years by the time you were a senior.
Yeah.
He'd been there a long time.
He was.
And he was there for another 10 before he stepped down.
Yeah.
One of the things that you may or may not have been aware of, but the whole time you were in high school, the state of California passed a law about earthquake safety, because there had been an earthquake in 1933 in Long Beach. And they passed a law because they said if kids had been in school when that happened, they would have been killed. So we have to have a law to make sure every classroom is earthquake safe. Well, that building that you were in was not deemed to be earthquake safe. And that's why, well, you were, but the auditorium was, and it's still there today. But and as is the domestic arts building, the music room is still there. But the gym and that old building, they had to go. But they got rid of those right after you graduated. But it took them a while.
Yeah.
But so nobody ever talked about it being an earthquake unsafe building.
Never heard that.
Yeah.
I have never heard that.
Well, what happened is that in the new law that says you have to be earthquake safe, they said if some kid gets hurt in a school building that isn't earthquake safe, the board members are personally liable.
Ooh.
And so every board member is going, we got to fix these buildings.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you remember, because it happened when you were in high school, when they bought the football field across the street? Or was that already there?
No, that wasn't there.
Because they did that right about the time you were in high school, I think. They bought that land south of Rocky Hill.
Yes, where it is now.
And
yeah.
they built that tunnel under the road. You remember that?
I don't remember that I don't remember that.
When they bought it or the tunnel?
Well, when they finally put it in.
Okay.
You know, because I always remember the old field.
Right along Portola Avenue there.
Yes, it was right in back.
That's where all the games were. Yeah.
Yeah.
And didn't the street actually go through the campus, Dolores Street? Or did it?
No.
But it was like a driveway where the buses dropped kids off.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but you never rode the bus because
then they went across the street. I mean, bought that property across the street where they put the field there.
Right. But that happened after you think?
Yeah.
Okay, not while you were in school.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The tennis courts, we had tennis courts and they were I would say on the south end of the building, big building.
Yeah, by the corner of Rocky Hill.
Yeah, I couldn't remember, but I always thought there was a house that sat right there on the corner.
Somebody told me that was where some teachers lived.
Yes, I think the one who taught taught sewing or cooking, one of those, I'm not sure. I think she lived there in that corner.
Well, I was told later the music teacher lived there in the 40s.
Yeah.
After you.
Yeah.
Late 40s, early 50s. It was still there. Well, cool. What about people who your grandparents' age? People who you were grandparents' age in Exeter. Did you know many people that were elderly when you were a kid?
Not really. I don't.
Nobody comes to mind.
Not
because I was thinking about this, is that if somebody was 80 in 1935, when would they have been born? Right? It would have been whatever, 1835 minus 80. I wish I could.
They would have been.
Yeah, it would have been 1855.
Yeah.
So before the Civil War.
Yeah.
So you would have had a kid who was 5 years old when the Civil War started, is now 80 years old, living in Exeter.
Yeah.
Potentially. And so my question is their memories of the late 1800s when they were growing up. Did you ever?
I don't think they ever. I mean, of course, my father's parents, both my the paternal grandparents, lived in Virginia, so I didn't ever see them.
Okay.
I didn't know them. My other the grandparents lived in Exeter.
Okay.
West of Exeter. But I never heard them talk about anything like that.
But they grew up around Exeter in the 1800s.
No.
Where'd they come from?
They came from Missouri.
Okay.
Yes.
So they talk about Missouri from the 1800s.
Yeah.
They didn't.
No.
They just were talked about any of that stuff. And they never talked about like World War One and any of that stuff that they had happened earlier. So they weren't really big storytellers.
No.
Too much going on right now.
We didn't ask.
Right.
So.
Well, I'm wishing I asked more earlier than waiting.
I asked a lot of things from my parents.
Yeah.
But I didn't. But.
Yeah, I know. Me too. There's so many things I wish I had asked about. Grape Festival was a big deal back then, right?
Yes, it always was.
Always was.
Always was a big.
And it was called the Grape Festival for
at that time,
all those years.
Emperor grapes were the big thing, you know.
And everybody in town knew it. Emperor grapes was the thing that kind of made Exeter go, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the people worked in grape packing houses.
Yeah.
And
my mother packed grapes.
did she?
Yes.
What packing house did she?
She worked for the Ways.
Okay, that would be Howard Way's parents, his parents, and then later maybe him. I don't know, but well, that's. I was going to say, so who do you remember as the packing house people that were in town?
It was hard work. I mean, for the women.
Was it mostly women?
Also, my father, during the grape season, for several years, worked as the foreman in the packing house. I mean, seeing that everything was taken care of just during the grape season.
So it was long days.
Yes.
Start early, come home late. Yeah. And was it mostly, most of the grapes were shipped out in the train cars?
Yes.
Not trucks?
Yes.
Trucks too?
Not that I know of. I think most of them were because the packing houses were right there along the track.
Right.
And they usually were loaded onto the tracks.
Now the tracks by your house were Visalia Electric, right?
That was Visalia.
Yeah. So was there a lot of traffic on those?
A couple of times a day was all, it went and then it came back. And I remember we used to put a penny or something on the track to
flatten it out.
Flatten it out.
Worked every time, right? See a lot of flat pennies. And you didn't try to get the engineer to honk at you or anything?
No.
Did they make a lot of noise? Did they honk a lot?
I don't think, but we got used to it where we probably didn't even
notice. Yeah. Oh, well, okay. So you graduate in 39, and then what'd you do?
I went to business college in Fresno, 4 C's.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I went for about 6 months up there.
Okay.
And then I went to work for an office in Visalia.
Okay.
Worked there until I quit in 43 to get married and
married a flyboy.
Yeah.
Was he already flying at the time?
He had just gotten his commission and been sent to Hobbs, New Mexico to into big planes.
Okay.
So.
And was he an Exeter kid too that you went to high school with? High school sweetheart?
Yes. He came here from Kansas the year that he started high school.
Class 39 also?
No, he was a year, he graduated in 40.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so he graduates in 40 and then went off to, before the war. So what did he do right after high school?
He went south and worked for Sears for a few months, and then he came back and he worked over at the airfield over at Lemoore.
Oh.
It wasn't, it was a training center.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't the one that
Right.
It's not what they call it. Yeah, remember.
I don't know that name. So he was at the airfield there.
Yeah, he worked over there, and then he enlisted in the Air Force after that.
Did he wait till Pearl Harbor before he enlisted, or he enlisted before Pearl Harbor?
He enlisted in, I think in May of 41.
So before Pearl Harbor.
I think so.
So he was in already when they.
No, he didn't actually go in until. Gosh, I can't remember the dates.
But you two were together during all that. You were still an item.
Yeah.
Okay. And then so you got married and then he gets shipped out.
Yeah.
To England.
Yeah.
And B-17s.
Yes.
And doing missions over Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And you said he was shot down on his 10th mission?
On his 9th or 10th mission.
Wow.
Yes.
And so he spent basically 2.5, 3 years in prisoner of war camp?
From December of 43 until April of 45.
Yeah, finished it out. Wow. Was he in Germany, or did they ship him to Poland or somewhere?
Oh, no, he was in Germany.
It was in Germany, okay.
Yeah, he was in the hospital for several years when he was shot down. Not several years, several months before he finally was put into a permanent camp.
So he was injured on the
he was injured. He was injured when he.
So did he parachute out? Yes. And then they got injured when he landed?
No, he got some kind of a shot through his lung while he was still in the plane.
Oh, wow. So all the time he was parachuting out, he was bleeding. Ouch. Okay.
Yeah.
So he gets released and comes home.
Yes.
And he was physically okay at that time?
Yes.
Okay.
He was fine. Yes.
And then you guys settled into life in Exeter.
Yeah. He was in Exeter.
Yeah. And so he didn't stay with airplanes or anything.
No, he would like to have stayed in, the Air Force, but they didn't have any openings. There was no place for them to put him at that time. So,
right.
He just got out of the service.
Okay. And then so you settled in, not on C Street this time. Where'd you guys raise your kid?
We got him. At that time there wasn't. Housing was pretty short at that time. We lived with my parents for a little while, and then we lived with his parents for a little while. We rented a place, and then we finally found my father finally built an apartment for us above his garage, and so we lived there for several years. So
that on C Street?
That was on C Street, yeah. And then we rented a place out in the country, out north of town. And while we were out there, then we had bought property on Powell Street and started building our home there. Over on the south side of town. So that's where we went, where we spent the rest of the time.
Okay. And where did he, what was his vocation?
Pardon?
What was his job again?
When he came home?
Yeah, when you guys were over at Powell.
Oh, he was in construction.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
He worked for a company out of Visalia.
Okay. Well, great. And then you started your family.
Oh, yeah.
So wait a minute.
We started our family before we moved there.
Well, I was going to say though, but you were on the other side of the tracks.
Well,
your kids would have gone to Wilson.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that?
If there was that distinction that there used to be. Because my kids had a lot of friends from the other side of the track.
You know, so Lincoln and Wilson kids would mix.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, they split that up so that they went to Wilson for part of the time, and then the other grades, they went to Lincoln, so they were.
Yeah, they mixed up the tracks thing.
Yeah.
Well, some of the kids who were there later than you said that Lincoln and Wilson used to go kindergarten to 8th grade separately.
Yes, yes,
But Lincoln, because Wilson had a gym,
yes.
Lincoln kids would go over there to play on the basketball team. So they could be on the Wilson basketball team with Wilson kids. I don't know if they had to be pretty good to get in the door, but that's what I was told. So, okay, so you were able to manage having your kids go to Wilson, and you were okay with that?
Oh, yeah. I didn't really have much choice.
No, not when you picked Powell Street. So you just jumped into momhood and followed your kids through school through the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah.
And how many kids do you have?
4.
4. And the oldest,
Alan.
And
then Ron and Greg and
Jennifer. Okay. And so Alan would have graduated in the early 60s.
Yes.
Probably.
Yes.
About what, 62, something like that?
Yeah. They all graduated in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were all born in the 40s.
Yeah. Right.
Which makes sense. And so they were sports kids. And so you went to a lot of games.
Oh, yeah.
You sat in a lot of bleachers at basketball, baseball, football.
Football mostly. Ron was in track for a while. Jennifer played tennis. But yeah, they were in sports.
So you spent a lot of time in bleachers watching games. That's great. And how did they feel about going to the same high school their mom and dad went to?
Not that I ever voiced an opinion on that.
That just was the way it was.
Yeah, that's the way it was.
Yeah. So reflect on the Exeter that you knew growing up. When you were born, the town of Exeter had about 1,800 people in 1921. And when your kids were born, it probably had 3,000.
Yeah, 2,500.
Something.
3,000.
Yeah. And then when your kids graduated from high school, it was probably 5,000.
Yeah.
So it didn't grow a lot.
No.
And
I don't really know what the population is now.
The sign says, I think 11,000 something. So all these years, it went from when you were born, 2,000 to now.
Oh, yeah.
That's not that much.
And I don't know anybody in town anymore.
Sure. You probably know more than you think. One of the things, I read a lot of old newspapers, and they talk in the old Exeter Sun about like the Oddfellows Hall.
Yes.
Where was the Oddfellows Hall? On Pine Street.
It would have been in the building where the Bank of America is now. That used to be all building along that block.
Okay.
And it would have been not quite in the middle of that block, probably a little bit farther west.
Was it upstairs?
Yes.
So it was an upstairs.
Well, they had an upstairs for the meeting, downstairs was the kitchen.
Oh, okay. In that building.
Yes.
Where was the Legion Hall? I see people talk about the Legion Hall, and I can't figure out where that must have been.
I don't know where that was.
Okay.
I don't have any idea.
Well, they refer to it in newspaper articles of the Exeter back in the day, or 1920.
I don't even know where the Kiwanis, where they met. I mean, how they.
Well, they used to meet in the mixer building, upstairs of the
upstairs.
mixers.
Oh, okay.
Both the
okay.
Kiwanis and the Lions met upstairs there
Okay.
until it burned down.
Yeah.
They met up there.
Yeah.
So that was one meeting hall. And of course, the Masons are across the street
Yes.
from the old mixers. And there's a hall up there. But what other kind of halls or public spaces did they have meetings in that you remember?
Yeah.
When you were a kid?
I don't know.
And you remember the movie theater?
I remember the movie theater. Yes.
Did you go to the movies?
The first one.
Which one was the first one?
It was the one that the Peas had down on
Northeast.
Yes, that was it.
Okay.
And then the other one was on south, down south of E.
But that came later.
Oh yeah, that came later.
And that wasn't the Peas, didn't own that one.
No, I don't know who had that.
Okay.
But yeah, I remember when we were young and would go to the movies. Well, it was usually just on Saturdays, when they had the matinees for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And they always probably every 6 weeks had a new serial, that went from week to week before the comedy or the cartoons and then the movie. And when the serial started, if you went, you paid 10 cents to get in, and you got a little button or a little pin. And if you wore that pin, then the next week when you went, it was only 5%.
Oh my gosh. And 5 in the next weeks too.
Yeah.
So if you got in on the first one, that's a 50% discount. That's a big deal. And this was during the Depression.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody had any money. But you had a dime and a nickel to get into the movie.
And that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
That was a lot of money. And
did you get a Coke and a popcorn too?
Oh
no. Some kids did though.
Possibly.
Okay. The kids with money. Got popcorn and a soda.
I'm not even sure that I remember that they sold popcorn at that time.
Oh, maybe not. I
don't think they had the soda and the popcorn.
Maybe not.
Into it.
Now, did they have mixers and drugstore and Exeter Drug both on the corner across from each other? Was Exeter Drug there then?
When I was growing
when you were a kid?
I think so, probably. We didn't get downtown much. On Saturday night, everybody in town, everybody would go to town on Saturday night. And if they had a car, they parked their car along the street and they did nothing but just visit with each other.
Just on Pine Street, on Main Street, just a big social gathering.
You'd sit in your car and somebody go by and
And these were high school kids or young adults or older adults?
It was when I was very young.
Okay.
And those people,
So it was your parents' generation that would just go down and have a social on Main Street.
And so, there were people at that time. So,
But would they drive their car down or walk?
A lot of them had to walk.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's funny. What about of course they had mixers there in the corner and the Bank of America was across the street, right? Yeah. And then down the street was the Redwood Cafe?
Down from Bank of America.
Yeah, on that side. And I understand that was a pretty popular place.
Yeah, it was. We hung out there when we were in high school.
You did, okay.
Yeah.
So that was a place to just hang out and have a soda or ice cream or something. Okay.
It was just a small area in the back and there was a jukebox and if you wanted to dance, you could dance. Just in a small square.
Sure. What about across the street on the other side of Pine Street? What was over there?
Um, well, in later years, there was another cafe. Um, I don't remember the name. I know at one time that while I was in high school, that my oldest brother and his wife ran that and had that, and I used to work part-time in there when I was in high school.
In a restaurant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
It was mostly, I mean, mostly it was just kind of a sandwich and milkshakes and that type of stuff.
Well, one of the things I was going to ask you, that two-story building on Pine Street, under the water tower, used to, at one time it was a police station, and right across from the little triangle park, right on Pine, between Pine and Rocky Hill. That building was built in 1928 as the electrical power distribution building in Exeter. And so when you were in high school, they would have built that when you were 7 years old. And it's only one of the few, anyway, it had to have been a pretty big deal to have all these electrical power lines coming out of that building, supplying power to the city. I just wonder if you remembered any of
I
that.
don't remember that. I not at all.
Huh. Okay. Well, I figured it must have been a big deal because it was it's a big
Well, it
old,
probably was. I mean, but I don't remember.
wasn't on your radar. Well, I was going to ask you about other things like police and firemen. And do you remember a lot of fires in Exeter growing up? And how it was a volunteer fire department?
My husband was a volunteer fireman for several years. I don't remember any great fires.
Maybe any packing house fires or?
Well, there was the packing house, the one packing house fire that but that was later on.
Yeah.
Not when I was real young.
Yeah. And what do you remember about the Exeter police?
Well, I don't know that there was
anything noteworthy?
Anything that really I would have to say was important to me anyway.
Well, there was an article recently written about the big Filipino riot in 1929 in Exeter. And you would have been 8 years old, so a pretty little kid. But at the time, I think it was a pretty big deal. There was Mr. Firebaugh, who had the ranch out kind of north of town, they brought in 100 or so laborers from the Philippines, young men. And it was during the grape festival. And there was basically a Filipino guy that got into it with a white guy, ended up stabbing him, and 300 white guys descended on Firebaugh Ranch to get back at the Filipinos, and they ended up setting his barn on fire.
Oh, really?
Yes. And it made national news as this very, and Mr. Crosson, who ran the Exeter Sun, ran a special edition, extra riot, disrupts the town. It was a big deal.
What year was that?
29, October of 29. So you'd have been a 7-year-old kid and not paying any attention to that kind of stuff.
I wouldn't have known anything about that.
But the guy that got stabbed was Adolf Borgman.
Oh, really?
Yes, a young Adolf Borgman got himself stabbed on October of 29. He was okay.
Well,
because you knew him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, he was probably 15 years older than you, but he was a young man.
Oh, my God.
And he was one of the guys that got into it with the Filipino guys. Anyway, I just remember if you had any memories of that.
None whatsoever. And I'm just curious then, did they send the Filipinos back then? And did Fireball get rid of them or what?
Well, there was no place to live anymore because they had been staying in the barn and they didn't
Oh,
want.
they had been staying in the
Yeah,
barn.
yeah, they'd been living out there and they knew that it was, no, they left. They did not come back. But what was going on at the time in 1925, all the immigration from other countries stopped.
Mm.
But the Philippines was an exception because after the Spanish-American War in 1898-99, the Philippines became a territory of the U.S.
Mm.
So it was like you weren't bringing in people from another country.
Yeah, yeah.
So farmers got around the whole immigration laws by bringing in Filipino men.
Mhm, mhm.
So it became complicated in a lot of deals, but this made national news at the time. It's pretty crazy,
That's amazing.
but no memories, and nobody ever talked about it afterwards. You never remember ever hearing about it.
I never heard that.
Interesting,
Never heard that.
interesting, because I guarantee you Adolf Borger remembered it. He absolutely did. But okay, I'm trying to think of some others. See, the 30s was a really big decade for farm expansion and a lot of packing,
Mhm,
that they were packing a lot of train cars
Yeah.
full of grapes and then citrus too. So did you know folks connected with the citrus industry too? You knew orange people too, right?
I didn't knew much about that. As I say, my parents worked during the grape season and I don't know that I ever took any interest in any other thing.
Yeah. Now, do you remember when World War I started when you were in high school? When Hitler invaded Poland in 39?
Yeah, yes.
You had just gotten out of high school because it happened in the fall.
Yeah.
So you remember when the news of that had to have been a big deal.
You mean
When World War II started, it was going on for a couple of years
Oh, yeah.
before we got in, but you knew about the war going on with Germany and France
yeah,
because he rolled into France and
yeah.
caused a big ruckus. But the impression I got is that Mr. Crosson, the Exeter Sun guy, so I'm assuming you knew him.
I knew of him. I didn't know him really personally.
Weren't his kids about your age?
Nancy was my age. She went to
Oh,
school
was
with
she?
me. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
She ended up living across the street from me.
Oh,
She married Mr. Petter and they
Yes,
had a couple of kids
yeah.
and they lived a couple of houses down from us
yeah.
on E Street.
Mhm.
And I never knew that she was a Clausen.
Oh, really?
I did not until recently.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, because he had what, 3 sons and Nancy, I think.
Yes, yes, I think so.
So, and she wasn't the older son, the other sons were older than you.
The other
right?
sons were older. I'm thinking maybe Philip was younger.
Okay.
No, Sam was the oldest. And then what was the other? There was another one.
I think one of them was born in 19. So I think that was that Sam? He would have been in 1919. And so he would have been in the class of 37 then.
Sam was about my oldest brother's age.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then what was the other son's name?
It escapes me at the moment.
I remember there was a Philip, and I was thinking that he was younger than Nancy.
Okay. But they lived on C Street too,
Yes.
the Clausens.
Yes,
So just down, so you probably had to walk by her house to go to school.
Yes, yes.
And he was Mr. Exeter Sun. He was the
Oh,
newsman
yeah.
all the way, wasn't he? And involved in everything.
Yes, he was.
And he was your dad in Kiwanis or
My
Lions?
dad was in Oddfellows.
Oh, he was in Oddfellows. Okay,
Yeah.
that's where you knew where the Oddfellows Hall was.
Yeah.
Okay. So what'd they do in Oddfellows?
No.
He just left, he left once a week to go to a meeting. That's pretty great. That's pretty great. Well, hey, I'm not gonna take too much more of your time here, but I just I so appreciate you letting me carve out some time in your life. Well, are there some other memories you want to share before I close you out?
I don't really think so.
Just growing up in Exeter, you had a
Growing up in Exeter, you know, there wasn't a great deal to do in Exeter when I was younger. Of course, we always in the summer, there was the small little wading pool at the park, and we always would go there in the summer when it was hot. And but there was, as I say, there were not a lot of things to do.
So you just entertain yourselves.
Yeah, that's just about it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.